Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining this panel on how artists can lead the conversation on AI. My name is Emily Best. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am probably more popularly known as the founder and CEO of Seed&Spark, although that's not totally the capacity in which I am showing up today. I'm showing up today mostly as an artist myself and a filmmaker, and the co-writer and director of a project called Mr. Jesus, which is currently crowdfunding. So if you find this valuable and you want to kick us some money to make this project about AI, we'd really appreciate it. The film follows Chris, who is a down-on-his-luck actor who wakes up one morning to discover that his identity has been stolen to make a GenAI Jesus, and now everyone thinks he's the second coming. And the film really explores what are the motivations behind the people who build technology that we trust? What does it mean to have technology we trust? And what are the ways in which we might shape our own behaviors to exert more agency during this time of tremendous technological transformation that no one asked for? If I can just wear my politic on my sleeve a little bit. I invited Eric and Jermaine as two incredibly smart and thoughtful people who have been thinking about this and in many cases doing things about AI in the creative industries. And the reason that I'm not introducing myself as founder and CEO of Seed&Spark is because my inquiry here is primarily as an artist, right? The questions that I'm going to ask are really about the interests of artists and how artists can lead the discussion. In my role as CEO of a technology company, I have been privy to a whole lot of conversations where AI is inevitable. Oh, look, my dad's here. That's so nice. Where we're sort of meant to believe that if technology can exist, it should exist, and now it's just up to you to figure out how to adopt it. That is an interesting perspective. I think the thing that I was noticing is that there was a certain subset of people, a lot of them in the academic space or in the government regulation space, they're not in the government anymore, or even in the tech ethics sector, who have a lot of information and feel really empowered around how to make decisions, and they have all these thought leaders they follow, and they're going to all these conferences. But when I started talking to the Seed&Spark community, when I reached out to even folks that I consider very thoughtful and influential in the space, and I said, who's shaping your thinking? They were like, oh no. So I thought this was a good opportunity for us to gather some of those people. And at the end of this, I'm also going to share some resources of things that I think are really interesting that we can be following, and hope that this is fruitful for y'all. But I just want to be clear, I'm going to spend 20 minutes picking the brains of these two really smart individuals. And then I really want to open it up to all y'all to start to get questions answered. I want to be clear, none of us is building AI technology platforms, unless you guys have started businesses that I don't know, right? So this is really from the perspective of we are artists. What are the tools in our toolkit? What is the sword in our hand to start to understand how to show up in this digital transformation age? Does that make sense? Awesome. Okay, thank you so much. So Jermaine, would you do us the honor of introducing yourself to this beautiful community?
Sure. I'm Jermaine Johnson. I'm a partner, manager, producer at Three Arts Entertainment. I am currently the head of our Atlanta office as we continue to grow from a mom and pop shop that was kind of built on the office and Parks and Recreation and 30 Rock to this, much larger company with people that I find myself not recognizing on a daily basis, but we still somehow have maintained this mom and pop ethos, and I really still very much enjoy kind of this homegrown fostering of my company as we continue to survive and thrive amidst every single upheaval that this business has thrown at us.
Oscar nominated producer, if I
Yeah,
may.
Oscar losing producer. That's a
It's all in how you frame it. So this is Hollywood. Oscar nominated is what we're going with. And Eric, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here. I am an improviser and an on-camera actor who's been working in the Atlanta market for 20 plus years. I'm in the second term as SAG-AFTRA Atlanta local president, representing SAG-AFTRA members from Georgia and South Carolina. I was also on the 2023 TV theatrical negotiating committee. I was on the 2022 commercial negotiating committee. I was on the most recent 2025 commercial negotiating committee. I'm on a national AI task force for AI for SAG-AFTRA, and then I serve on multiple national committees for SAG-AFTRA, self-tape provisions, and all sorts of stuff to help protect our members.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate
Yeah.
it. And I really appreciate these two for just like responding to the call. Like I put this out not very long ago and they were like, yes, let's have this conversation. I think I'm very good friends with Dana Harris, who is the managing editor of IndieWire, and she dared to write a story about this sort of big Gen AI film project in studio. The story which led with the film's like objectively not good. But she's just been subject to this barrage of online hate. And I think it is like it's dangerous territory because like feelings are really hot. So one of the things I wanted to introduce into the chat before we get started, let me copy this over, is Seed&Spark's Code of Conduct, which here's where I am going to wield my capacity as Seed&Spark. We have a code of conduct for online, in-person, and virtual events and gatherings and community. We are all here in good faith, and we are all here to like really work through what is a difficult time. And so you can click over to the code of conduct, but it's basically like be cool, assume good intentions, treat each other with respect. It's something I wish we could give to the nation at this moment, but we'll use it at least in this room for now. So Jermaine, I want to start with you and just understand a little bit to the extent that you can represent others, but really also for you. How are you and the artists that you're working with thinking about AI right now?
I mean, the word that comes to mind, it's like there's a lot of fluidity to thought, right? Like I think the initial reaction was, um, this is evil, and this is, I can just speak for the clients that like I just deal with on a regular basis, right? The people that I represent, but it's there was a level of, don't trust the Romans when they come bearing gifts, right? Like the more they pitch about how great this is going to be, the less it is trusted, right? And now we're in this interesting space for me where I'm watching my clients, they're starting to try to find, and I will say there's a little bit of encouragement for me of just like learn things. I'm a big advocate for it, like learn where it could help you and learn where it could harm you, but don't put your head in the sand in terms of the tech itself. And they have started to learn a lot of like, oh, hey, this piece right here could be additive for a deck that I'm making. This piece right here is detrimental to my first AD, my second AD, like my staff, my crew. And that has allowed us to have a lot of really open and interesting conversations around how they can take some ownership over the conversation. I think that's the reality. I think that's what my clients are starting to get to in terms of like, okay, they've made their peace with the fact that there is an overwhelming amount of money involved in pushing this thing forward, right? So there is not like, if everybody's being honest, it's not going away. It's about how do you figure out how to take ownership and some agency over it if it's going to be encumbering your work environment in some way, shape, or form, and be able to speak to it intelligently and push back where you need to. So that's kind of the latest and greatest with some of my clients. And then I've had one client in particular who is a director and not a writer that sent me an AI generated pitch on an idea, and I very politely told them to never do that again. Because it wasn't good. I was like, it's not. I was like, there's no human soul in it.
Yep. Yeah. I have quarterly investor updates for my investor community for Seed&Spark. And I do it as a call because I want them to feel the responsibility to show up for me in the way that I am showing up for the commitment I made to them. And a lot of them have started sending their like AI meeting note takers. And I had to write to my investor community and be like, hi, this is going to be a consent-driven process. So if you plan to replace yourself with a bot, I need to know in advance and I need to have a good reason why. But what you're not going to do is just send a bot in your place as if that is the same as showing up. So yeah, I do think this consent-driven piece is so important. Look, there are great pieces about it for accessibility, for example, right? People with processing challenges can really use it to like actually absorb the content of a meeting afterwards. But if you're using it to replace community, that's where I sort of draw my line in that context. Okay, so speaking of drawing lines, Eric, I would really love you to talk about, I mean, God, I sort of can't believe you're here with all the things that you know. How did you?
You're really setting me up too big. Like I can only fall short of your expectations.
I'm so sorry.
That kind of build up.
You said it. I leaned in. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. What is AI?
What is no? Can you talk to us a little bit about how SAG like informed the process of like sort of drawing lines and building some guardrails?
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to mention is like I don't speak on behalf of SAG-AFTRA. Like I will speak on my experiences and my insights as to what I experienced in the process, which was a shared experience with a number of SAG-AFTRA members. So, you know, my views and perspective don't necessarily represent SAG-AFTRA, but I just want to be clear about that. I also want to be clear that this is a really for sure, a very sensitive subject on which everyone has an opinion. And I think they're all valid. And I think it's important that I just say that up front, that everyone's opinion is valid. My goal as a SAG-AFTRA leader is to make sure that our members are working and that they're working in a safe environment and being paid appropriately for the work that they do. So if we start there, then it'll inform what I'm going to say next. So the things that informed SAG-AFTRA as we moved into negotiations in 2023, which was when we went on strike specifically for these types of artificial protections, amongst other things, is SAG-AFTRA has been involved in image and likeness protection since its inception. And they were really on the forefront of AI provisions and technology well before it became an issue in like, I don't know what year it was, but like, let's say early 2020s, 2021, 22. They've been researching it for a decade, and they were talking to industry leaders, to different AI labs, but most importantly, we were talking to our members and seeing what kind of things were already occurring. Even before 2023, we had members, myself included, who were doing digital scans. I did a comic book, a superhero show called DC Stargirl. And on day 2, I think I had a body scan in character, right? And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know. I just did it. Because there was nothing in place. I didn't know what it was. And so we talked to members. What kind of things were currently going on? What were the pain points? What were their concerns? So we could best represent them. And then I think the guiding principle that we took moving into negotiations was that AI can be a creative tool, but without guardrails, it can really jeopardize and undermine our members' careers and storytelling integrity. And so our goal was to make sure that every human being will remain in control of their image, likeness, voice, and craft. And they would do that in three-tiered. Our approach was three-tiered. First part was that every performer would have informed consent before agreeing to using any type of AI technology, right? And an informed consent means that in a court of law, any reasonable person, given the explanation and information, would be able to make a reasonable decision to understand how it's being used. So to say, yeah, we're going to make a digital replica and we're going to use it in a cartoon. That's not informed consent. We're going to use it in a cartoon and you are going to be wearing this clothes. You're going to be on top of a building yelling to the public and you'll be saying this. That starts to become informed. So consent, which is informed consent. Then we want to make sure that there's compensation involved. So SAG-AFTRA wants to make sure that it is never cheaper to use an AI digital replica or generative AI version of a performer. It should be the same or more expensive than using a performer. So that means the scanning part, but also the usage part, right? And then the last piece of the puzzle is control. So I want to know what's going to happen to my digital image once the project's over. And the answer should be, in almost all cases, it will be destroyed and not used. And so based on those three tenets, informed consent, compensation, and control, those are the real three pillars that we use to inform our decision-making ability in negotiations. Because those three things, in our opinion, help performers and artists maintain the integrity of their likeness. So that way my digital replica is never saying or doing something that I wouldn't do in person.
That part is so important, especially as we are, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges that folks are having with AI, I had a literal nightmare the other night that somebody had used AI to generate a Tinder profile on my behalf and then went and showed it to my husband, right? But I was like I woke up being like, that could happen. I need to have a conversation with my husband now. Like, I just was like, these are the things that are there. This is actually part of the premise of Mr. Jesus, is that this actor had been scanned while working background for specifically Outer Banks. I don't know why that's the show we chose. And it ends up in a database that somebody's able to use, right? So I think it's really important, sort of as storytellers, also that we are showing the potential, like, near future or near now consequences of what happens when it's totally unregulated and when there isn't informed consent. That's incredibly helpful. I would be really curious about who's, like, so to the point earlier of thought leadership, like, who are you following? Who are you listening to? How are you, Jermaine, to your point, getting smart about it?
It's interestingly enough, like my personal point of view on a lot of this, like a lot of like bleeding edge, cutting edge technology, right, in any space, is that anybody that purports to be a genius is probably lying to you, right? And probably figure out what they have to gain by convincing you that they're a genius. So a lot of, kind of, call it, I think it's a thought partnership is what I've been really looking at more intently with the people around me, right? Like the executives at the studios, the producers that I may collaborate with, the artists themselves, right? Natasha Leone, started a company called Hysteria, and I'm going to sit down and talk to all of those people and hear how they're looking at AI from their point of view, right? Because that they founded a whole company built on it. So I am finding that it's more thought partnership in these stages. Granted, like, it has been around longer than we think, but it's still kind of the nascent stages of this tech emerging in the media ecosystem. So for me, it's more about the people around me and trading notes and stories on what we found and how we can kind of again collaborate on drawing some very clear, distinct lines, right? Like I have no doubt that I will likely email Eric within the next couple of weeks saying, "Hey man, can I just buy you a coffee and talk more about this?"
And I will say, I love coffee. Let's do that.
There you
And
go.
I will yes and it with a piece of pie.
Oh,
Hey, can
and
I come?
yeah.
Sure, come
There's
on.
pie.
Yeah.
And Eric, how about you? How are you informing your thinking around this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very fortunate because I am on a national AI task force, and basically those are the leaders within SAG-AFTRA, our chief counsel, our national executive director, and they're constantly bringing us either current or potential federal legislation that is in the Senate or the House, but also sending us any states that are doing any type of local legislation we get to see and talk about and discuss. And then we also get being a part of the TV theatrical standing committee. Once you're on the committee negotiating, then you come on the standing committee. So between the AI task force and the standing committee, a lot of tech companies come to us for guidance on how they can work with our members. And it's usually they'll put together a package and say, this is how we're going to do that. But what I try to do is I try to, I subscribe to like the Ankler and things like that to read. I tend to try to read, or without getting into specifics, I try to follow people who understand the technology and the human element of it, who aren't fear mongering, but also just aren't throwing up their hands and saying, "Oh, they'll never replace us." So people who are more strategic in their thinking about not only the technology but the human experience. And then I try to get as much information as I can from all sources, because a lot of times listening to people who may not agree with me specifically on certain issues is really valuable to hear, because then you understand what the real concerns are out there. And when I go to the negotiating table, I'm able to hopefully address some of those things. So I don't really put any limitations on it. I try to listen to everybody and kind of read as much as I can on it. I'm fortunate that I'm on the committee that actually they bring me a lot of information. But anyone who's representing both the technological and the human element is a good group to listen to. And so when you start thinking about any of the unions involved in the entertainment industry, so whether it be IATSE, DGA, WGA, or SAG-AFTRA, they're all coming at it from a human element perspective. And really, it's the unity between those types of unions that will actually help foster more protections for everybody in the industry. So I tend to listen to those resources as well.
It's interesting to think about this balance of like, where does regulation come from? Well, doesn't typically come from the tech companies unless they think there is like a clear financial benefit. It's not currently coming from the government, although Lena Khan still has her job, which is sort of amazing. And she is very antitrust and very pro-worker protection. And then it's labor, right? Like that is really the last line of defense when there is not self-regulation in the government, or self-regulation in the companies, there's not federal regulation. There is some state regulation, although the federal is trying to like wipe all that out. And so labor really is this kind of last line of defense. There is always like personal choice, right? But I don't know, how's recycling going, y'all? I don't mean to be rude about it, but you know what I mean? Like we understand that personal choice is the thing they foist upon us when the people who actually have power to move mountains don't want to use it, right? And so labor is that kind of mountain, that like networked power that I find interesting. I did want to highlight one initiative that I wish more people knew about, which is the Archival Producers Alliance. I'm going to drop the link in here. If you don't know, there is a whole job, mostly in documentary, called the archival producer. Those are people who like go pouring through historical documents and finding the things that can really help story tell on screen. A lot of it is in historical documentary, but archival producers work across a lot of different media. And the Archival Producers Alliance were particularly concerned because, of course, people were starting to use GenAI, for example, to kind of like recreate historical scenes. And the challenge, and Getty and a lot of the archival companies were starting to build those tools on the back of the archives that they own. And then those fake things were getting re-entered into the effectively the historical record. And they had a real concern on behalf of archival producers whose entire job is to be like as truthy as absolutely possible. And a lot of archival producer work goes to PBS that has extremely high journalistic standards. And so they built a GenAI initiative, and Stephanie Jenkins is one of the leaders of it. It was just run by this group of absolutely brilliant archival producers who decided to take the lead here, and they built a set of guidelines around the use of generative AI, because they found a lot of really interesting ethical uses of AI. And there's some really interesting examples of that. They have case studies. But I think this Gen AI initiative is like outside of the context, because Archival Producers Alliance, it's not a union. It's literally just like a professional trade association light, honestly. But they were able to leverage their network power to build something that they're getting. I mean, PBS has adopted these standards, right? A lot of the public media has adopted these standards. So it's a really interesting use of kind of collective expertise, and is a toolkit I find that's really interesting. And towards the end of this conversation, I'm going to drop in a bunch of links. Actually, I can just drop them in now. I spoke to my friend Jax DeLuca, who was at the NEA until everything went south. And she gave me a whole bunch of really cool initiatives, resources, and conferences of folks mostly working and teaching artists. So these are people who have a foot in academia and otherwise, but just some folks where we can also stay informed, and hopefully get more engaged. I was like, I hadn't heard of any of this. I consider myself like relatively well informed, and I hadn't heard of any of this. So I wanted to be sort of a vector to share some of this for y'all as well. Okay, I want to take a step back into the storytelling world and just ask the question, like, what are the narratives that you see around AI that you think are either helpful or harmful?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I think anytime narratives are in the extremes, it's not helpful, um, because it's not a full understanding of the actual narrative. And the narrative essentially is that, um, as far as I'm concerned, I always have an employer who is hiring me to do a job. That employer, um, without federal legislation, really has nothing tying them to an ethical use of anything, right? That's any working condition or wages, right? They can make, the only reason I can't work 16 hours in a row and then be back in 4 hours is because of provisions that we got in our contract, right? And so labor unions created the weekend. So the reality of the situation is that this is a bigger issue than just the entertainment industry. This issue affects every single human being. So I have an 11-year-old daughter. I don't want someone at the beach to take her picture and then it end up on a billboard, right? Or in an ad. So there has to be some type of legislation in place or some kind of parameters in place to protect those folks, because it's just not I hate to use the term like genie's out of the bottle, but it kind of is one of those things that the AI is being used not only by like large scale employers, but just everyday human beings, right? And so the narrative is that it is something that we need to put guardrails around because it is impacting our lives, whether we're in the entertainment industry or not. And to say that it's not going to do anything, it's no big deal, is one extreme. And the other is like, the world is over and we're all going to be replaced. There is a middle ground. And I think the narrative in the middle ground is really important and helpful for us because at any point, our employers could say, we don't want to work with you anymore. We're just going to do what we want. And we want to keep that conversation going because we want to instill in them the value of our performers, the value of human beings being a part of the storytelling. And that means we have to at least accept the fact that it is an element that they need to use. And we can go into why they feel like they need to use that because they're big, like they're Netflix and Hulu's and Disney. And they're very realistically competing with a guy in his garage who's making content and using AI, right? And because he has no restrictions as far as it concerns to SAG-AFTRA because he's not a signatory to the contract. So what we're trying to do also is create a fair, equal playing field so that our employers can also compete from a content creation standpoint, but also make sure that they do that in an ethical way so our members have consent, compensation, and control. And so any narrative that is kind of like taking both the technological and the human element and play, I think is super helpful. It's when we get into those extremes that I think it's less helpful.
And to piggyback that, I think the narrative from people that are removed or adjacent or outside of our business that it doesn't really affect them is I think that's just a flatly categorically false narrative, right? Like to Eric's point, right? I don't want to first taking a picture of my daughter, but you know, I enjoyed Mountainhead. I don't know if anybody watched Mountainhead on HBO, but like amidst the chaos of that movie, the underlying premise is this guy has an AI company that starts creating these videos that are polarizing society in a way that causes civil unrest across the globe. And it feels far-fetched, but I'm on plenty of group chats with family members that have nothing to do with this business that are sharing videos with me that are completely artificially generated and they have no clue. And I have to explain to them like, hey, that's not real. The Pope was not wearing a puffer jacket, right? Like all of these different, some of them are funny and cheeky, but some of them can have genuine, big, real world ramifications. And I think the more people can wrap their brains around the fact that, like to Eric's point, this is going to affect all of us, already is affecting all of us, and that having some sort of parameters and boundaries and legislation around it to protect the ways in which you can and cannot use this tool and or the disclaimers that have to come with certain things is going to be imperative as we move forward. So that narrative of like, hey, it's not my problem, that is massively harmful in my opinion.
Yeah, the other thing it does is when we deal in those extremes, it takes the artist and then, like to piggyback on what Jermaine just said, the human being out of the decision making process.
Right.
So as
Yep.
soon as we lose our consent, that's when it gets a problem. And sometimes extreme conversations or extreme points of view on AI, they'll lead to the fact that the artist or the human will not have a say in the decision making process. So
Yeah.
we want to stay engaged in all times to make sure that we're aware, we're educated, that we're unified, and that we're bold in the way that we approach these provisions.
The narrative that bothers me the most is the one that starts with the idea that it's called artificial intelligence. Because I think that word does not mean what they think it means.
Mm-hmm.
I think intelligence without context, intelligence without human values or morals, intelligence without a gut check, intelligence without, we could go on and on. That isn't intelligence to me. And humans have always, like, this is the historical fact about us, we've always described ourselves as whatever our latest technology is. So like we used to be like tubes and waters. I'm not kidding, right? We invented plumbing and then we were plumbing. And then we invented electricity and then we were electricity. And then we invented computers and then we were computers. And I think it's really funny that we sort of like assign ourselves to the most cutting edge technology, and that still actually demeans what we are capable of in an interesting way. Like I think we have this really funny kind of self-understanding. So for me, one of the really damaging narratives is that this machine is intelligent at all, right? Like it can do things, it can do deductive reasoning, but that's actually not the same as real intelligence to me. I also really challenge the inevitability narrative. Like, this is coming, might as well get on board. It's like, well, okay. But to Eric's point, there's no agency in that, right? It was like, I do still at the end of the day have to choose what works for me. The last question I'll ask you, and then I really want to open it up to folks. Yeah, and Jack makes a terrifying point. A company that sells AI analysis of projects to predict profitability and there are flaws that lead to false results because it's all in the execution.
Well,
Ugh.
by the way, that's a tale as old as time. Before the AI, Relativity Media it sold. That was their whole bit. They're just like, we figured out the algorithm that can create a perfect movie that'll be successful, and we know how that ended.
So let's talk about agency for a second. What can the individual artist, and Eric, this is a challenge to think outside of artists who are protected by unions, because there is a whole lot of artists who haven't made it in there yet, but whose jobs and livelihoods are being impacted. What can the individual artist do to exert some agency and lead the conversation in this time?
You want me to start with that, or would you like Jermaine to start with that?
However you would like to. If you
Jermaine, you want to go first this time? Or?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I live on the soapbox of education, right? And so for me, it's learn as much as you can, right? Like Emma, you just shared, a litany of resources, right? And there's only more, right? There's as this technology continues to grow into different sections and have different capabilities, it behooves any artist to learn as much as possible so they can speak intelligently about it, right? Like you can't go, right? I can't go to Congress and lobby on alcohol if I actually don't understand the ramifications of alcoholism, right? Like if I actually don't understand how it's influenced people, what the statistics are. So I genuinely feel strongly that like the more artists can educate themselves on how this tech is being used. I mean, I genuinely and I'm sure Eric can speak to this a little bit, as much as you can have actors, writers, directors, like I'm in the PGA, you know what I mean? Like all of these unions that have meetings and resources and all sorts of conversations around this stuff. If I'm being generous, maybe 15% of membership pays attention, right? You know what I mean? Like you have all this stuff and they have no idea it's at their fingertips. And so I encourage everybody, like use the resources you have. I tell every writer, go like talk to the guild. Like they have all of this stuff, and just because you skip the meeting or we're sleeping through it doesn't mean it's still not available in a repository somewhere. Like actually go talk to your guild about like what's going on, where the conversation is at currently, and honestly, jump in, get involved. Even if you don't have to be, an expert on it. You have to be the most well-read person in the room. But getting involved and creating a space for you to learn and educate yourself with your peers and your partners will allow you to create, that coalition you're talking about, right? The labor coalition of people that are all, really in lockstep and informed and have a point of view on how to protect themselves against the ways this thing can be used for harm.
I also want to say, I established a safe word with my family, especially my parents. My stepdad is 82, my mom's in her 70s, and they are, it's my voice is readily available online, as is my image. It would not be difficult to create a voice copy and call my mom and tell her that I need her to do something, right? And so we created a word that we know that is sort of an inside joke in our family that I will never say publicly. That is
not
what,
on Zoom. That's
not
for
on
sure.
Zoom.
On a recorded Zoom.
Is what we will use to test basically, if somebody's like, they've got me kidnapped and you need to send money, right? They'd be like, what's the word? And I actually think those are the sorts of provisions we need to put in place in our digital landscape. And they're not things that we're necessarily thinking about all the time. But just having conversations with your family members and creating some safety around some of the downside impacts. I want to open it up to questions for the group.
Do you mind if I touch on that last topic real quick?
Yeah,
after Jermaine.
Yeah.
I would definitely yes and what Jermaine said about education and literacy and understanding, really understanding how AI works, understanding how it intersects with what you do, and what's legally at stake, right? And then after you educate yourself, I think you really need to make a decision for yourself as to how you want to interact with AI technology. And it should be a personal decision that you don't have to explain to any other individual. When it talks about literacy, I mean, showing up, I think showing up is huge. And so everybody who's here today, I really appreciate you being here, because this is like, obviously this is something important to you. And that's why I really enjoy doing things like this, is because people show up and they want to learn. And they come with a real open mind and a desire to understand. And so for that, I really respect everybody here and I appreciate you. You have to make your own decision. And once you make that decision, it's really easy to navigate the industry, because you can make your decisions based on your own moral and ethical principles as to how you want to engage, right? And then understand what your value as a artist is, understanding what your value is. So that way you're never undermining your value, right? And so with those three things, it goes a long way into how to engage with the industry. And so what was I had something else I wanted to mention. Maybe it'll come up in a second, but that's kind of how I would suggest people interact with the industry. I mean, I have the perspective, this is just with knowing everything that I know about AI, is that there is a very productive way that I can engage with technology and have not only a sustainable, but also a productive career. That's where I stand, right? I personally see a world that if I have informed consent, compensation, and control, I see a world where my digital replica, right, is working the same day that I'm working in person on a different project. That's how I see the possibility. But that's just my opinion. That's just how I see things. And other people are uncomfortable with that. So understanding where your lines are and where your compass leads you is really important. And then understanding that wherever you draw all those lines will have results, and it'll define how you engage with the industry. Because whether it's AI, working conditions, wages, residuals, or any other issue that has to do with labor, it's never going to go exactly how the employee wants it to, right? The workforce is never like, yeah, our boss got it right this time. We're always fighting. That's what labor unions do. We fight for working conditions and compensation and fair ethical treatment at work. Respect, right? And respect goes a long way. Understand what your value is and then hold yourself to it. You should never be replaced. You should be paid appropriately if you're not there working in person.
Appreciate that perspective. I feel like there were like 4 different t-shirts that I want to print out of what you just
said. Yeah, let's do it.
So the first question that we got from Rebecca is to what degree we're using AI in Mr. Jesus. That's a great question. If you go to our crowdfunding page, there are a lot of GenAI images, and we Annie Humphrey, who is friends with Eric, helped surface for us those SAG guidelines, and we leveraged the informed consent rule. And I really liked the idea of here, we're going to tell you very specifically exactly how we're using your image. And Brenna and Jude have primarily been the ones who have been making these ridiculous images for our campaign. The film itself is going to have extremely little AI, except for one place where it is narratively significant, because it is actually an important part of a character's story arc. But beyond that, it is made by humans, baby. And that is why we are fundraising for it. So if you go to the campaign, you'll see that we have used GenAI to maybe poke a little bit of fun at GenAI's capacity for making things that seem human, right? But the pitch video is, that's pretty much all human, and the film itself is all human. I did, however, have a friend pump the premise. I didn't know he was doing this. He pumped the premise of the film into Anthropic and into ChatGPT, and we got short scripts back for Mr. Jesus, and y'all, it was the most schlocky stuff you could possibly imagine. So I still feel like very long human writing. It was interesting. It had some interesting takes. It also produced like the most expensive version of the thing. So I don't think AI yet understands how to write for an indie film budget either. Daniela asked a really great question about international parameters. If you work for an international company, what power do you have to protect yourself? And I will just say, if you haven't seen what Denmark is doing, they are basically making federal law what SAG has just made for its members, which is that you own the rights to your digital image, voice, and likeness as a citizen, and you can sue companies who violate those digital rights. So I always look to Europe to be ahead of us on the regulation side, for sure. But yeah, I'd be curious if you know anything, you two, about international parameters. And anyone else in here, if you are, you know what we can do? We can unspotlight and actually start to have I'll move my own spotlight. There we go. We can open this up a little bit. So if anybody else knows the answer to these questions, please feel free to share. I think the answer around the international company is it depends on where their nexus is. And typically, if they're doing business in a US environment, they also have to follow local, federal, state, federal guidelines and certainly union rules. So it's a big ask. It depends, Daniela, which I know is not incredibly useful. I think the great question that Samantha asked is anybody aware of a database or message board or Discord where people are sharing how their companies are using AI? I'm dying to know the answer to that.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any of that. I think a lot of that is probably proprietary.
Yeah.
And people are probably apprehensive to share that. I think there are European organizations and different. I think there are different international organizations trying to put some guardrails on AI, but it really is going to depend on some of the countries. So, because I think we tend to think of like countries who tend to work with other countries when we start talking about this stuff. There are countries who don't necessarily work with other countries, who just want their own policies and procedures as it relates to things like this. And so it's hard to control in some countries from an international standpoint, I believe, but I'm not well educated on exactly what's going on.
Sandeep?
Hi, I hope you guys can hear me. I didn't prepare for this.
Yeah.
And I should have probably kept my mouth shut. I have so many things to say here, and I don't know which hat I should put on. So I'll just say two things here. Three things that artists have led into intellectual property discussion. They have always led. They have been decades ahead of the tech industry. So it's in your hands. Don't be intimidated by it and be actively involved. I'm just trying to tell you what these guys are telling you already, but also adding to it the fact that common artists have led IP rights. Our generation is much better off for Taylor Swift generation, which is actually making people more aware of what IP and what rights are. So that's one thing I wanted to tell you. And I was one of those who were Pollyanna-ish in the beginning, and very ironic given my history, who said, no, AI is not going to hurt you. What I underestimated was how people are going to actually use it. So be actively seeking. Do not underestimate AI based on the examples that we run. Do not underestimate it today based on what it does today or based on what you are able to do it today. Be actively seeking and treat it like a child. Occasionally we see a 3-year-old and say, oh my God, he did that. He's so smart. I wouldn't have thought of that. Treat it like that child who does not know how to cross the road also. So that's all I wanted to say. I have so much that I was pouring out and copying when you guys were saying, but I'm really not qualified to take too much more time. So I'll just shut up.
Oh, Sandeep, thank you so much. I actually really love this perspective that common artists have always been leading this conversation. That's the t-shirt. Olga. Oh no.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, good evening, everybody. And please, I have like 3 questions and I wanted to hear your opinion on it, but if it's too much, please cut it and pick the most important one. Pardon my, I don't want to say ignorance. I would rather say I'm not educated. That's why I'm here. And when we talk about AI, as this is everyone's concern. So I recently had an audition that agent sent me. It's for non-union film that will be filmed overseas in 3 different countries in Europe in a whole another language. And it's collaboration between US and other country in Europe. And that immediately made me think, how does this work there? I know Eric mentioned something on that matter that probably have to, my guess is applied to European local policies and everything when we talk about AI. But again, agent, I guess, does agent in this case negotiates all of that, and how does that work? What do you guys think? And then second thing, when we talk about this informed consent, I worked in research and I dealt a lot with informed consent forms. I doubt that this is the same informed consent, so I wanted to get more clarification on that. What Eric said, you have to be informed to the T on how it will be used. But do you have the option to say yay or nay? And how does it work? Can you pull back? Can you pull out of it? Do you discuss the video agent and how that works? And which leads me into the third question, into non-union in the film market. This is all related because my audition was for non-union film overseas, came through my agent, and then second one is informed consent form, and then third one is non-union independent market. Do you even have a say there? Because as I'm dealing mostly now with non-union indie filmmakers, I have to send these contracts back and beg them to add certain things that I'm concerned about as far as my own well-being. Begin to start with payments and some basic things. So do you think that's smart to focus on AI component, and what do you suggest that we do on that matter? I'm sorry. Yeah, I threw a lot at you.
This is great. I just want to say you always have a choice about who you work with. And certainly your contract is like your first line of defense when you're working non-union. And you can always pull provisions from what SAG has created for your own contracts. And you should never, ever feel bad about redlining the shit out of a contract that does not protect you appropriately. So I just want to say that yes, your legal contract is an incredible line of defense, and you have every right to put in the provisions that matter to you. And informed consent implies that you can say no. If you can't say no, it's not consent. So if they're saying your job here is contingent upon you saying yes, they would be in violation of informed consent.
So both parties have to sign.
Correct.
Okay.
And just, I mean, just the reality of the situation is that they may not hire you, right? Like that just may be the result. And that's what I was talking about earlier, is like understanding what your moral foundation is on these issues. So that way, look, there are things I will not do or say on TV or film. And I don't think there's a price I could be offered to do that, but I don't want to say that. But let's just say, let's just assume, right? There are things that I just wouldn't do, right? And there's no amount of money that would allow me to go beyond that and do it. So if somebody said, Eric, you've got to do this and we're going to pay you this. When I say no, I'm not going to do it, and they say, well, we're going to have to go find someone else to work with, I'm okay with that. Right? Because I'm standing on a different moral ground for myself. Everything we deal with, your rate is a condition of employment. Your working conditions is a condition of employment, right? I recently had an offer, and we were talking about, what size trailer I was going to have, right? That's a condition of employment. So if I said, no, I don't want this one, I want this one, then they could say, well, we can't do it, maybe next time, right? And so it's really important to understand that once you make that moral decision, then you stand by it, and you should feel good about your decision because you understand your value and you know where you stand on the issue. Now, in the non-union world, it's really important to understand that there aren't the provisions and the protections that exist on a SAG-AFTRA contract, and that's just the case. And while what I try to tell non-union performers is, and this is not a case to join the union. This is more of a, hey, just think about these types of things when you're out there working, right? I'm not here to say join the union because that's not my style. If I sign informed consent and I get paid, and then I have control, if any of those three things are violated, my union with the force of its lawyers, attorneys, and power within the industry will fight on my behalf to make sure there's some type of resolution to it, whether that be compensation or destruction of the violation or whatever that might be. In the non-union world, folks don't have those resources available to them. So if a non-union producer violates the contract that you sign with them, you have to ask yourself, well, what happens then? That's the big question, right? Do you hire an attorney?
Yeah.
Do you just let it go? So I think personally, in the non-union world, I think it should be you should really be very diligent and discerning about who you work with if AI is part of the situation, because not every mistake is malicious. Some of it is accidental, and whether it's malicious or accidental, it's still out there. And now my image is out there, because as a performer, there's two things that we're always thinking about, right? And it depends on where you work, commercial but like exposure is a huge issue. How much of my image is out in the world? Because there is a idea that if I'm doing every single Georgia lottery commercial in town, well, the North Carolina lottery commercial may not want me because I'm the Georgia lottery guy. My exposure is so great. Or if I'm on a TV show, my exposure is so great that someone else might not want to hire me. So I need to make sure that I'm compensated appropriately for that loss of potential work because of my exposure. And AI has the potential to basically increase your exposure a great deal without any type of compensation or control. And so you just really need to think through those types of things. And informed consent, I want to make sure, because informed consent is not like they have to tell you to the letter T. It has to be a reasonable understanding that a reasonable person could read it and know what the expectation is, right? So if they do a digital replica of me, and then my digital replica is like in a very revealing outfit or bathing suit, and I didn't agree to that, that's a violation, right? But if they said, we're going to have you in a very revealing outfit, but it's a little more revealing than I thought it was, then it starts getting into that gray area, because it's pretty reasonable for me to understand that, okay, they told me it was going to be revealing. That's a little bit more than I'm comfortable with, but I did agree to being in a revealing outfit. And that doesn't matter if that outfit is green, red, yellow, blue, purple, flesh tone, right? Like some of those things can be done now, right? So like they can change the color of my outfit with the tools they have today, and they had it many, many years ago, right? And so it's about that kind of discernment.
I just want to, we're at 3:01. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time, because it's clear that like this is a conversation that we should probably engage in and have again, which I am really, really grateful for. And I think we will probably do more of these. Thank you.
Emily, can I mention one more thing? Because it was the last little piece of her question is pretty important to just mention real quick. She asked about, what about the non-union film market? What I want you to understand is, like, in the union world with a SAG-AFTRA contract, if I distribute, like if Emily is under a union contract and she gets distribution through Netflix, there's a transference of rights and responsibilities to Netflix. Now, what you want to make sure happens is that also occurs in any other project that you work with, which again is going to be harder to do. So in the union world, there is a transference of rights. That's how they take responsibility for residual payments and things like that. But those rights go with the project. I just wanted to mention that so you understand how it works in the union world.
That's super important.
Sorry.
The contracts are extremely important, and they are how you enforce your own values and boundaries, which I really appreciate. So this little panel has been a mini production of Mr. Jesus the film. We will drop the crowdfunding link here. Even if you can't contribute, we would really appreciate it if you would tell your friends about the value that we are trying to provide here. This is kind of an example of the sorts of conversations we actually hope the film will create. And I think rather than the doom and gloom sort of extreme sides, we need to bring some humor and levity into this so that we can come to these conversations a little bit like lighter on our feet, a little bit more flexible, a little bit more generous. Jermaine and Eric, I'm really, really grateful to you and to all of you for being here and your incredibly smart questions. And we have an event coming up in Atlanta. So if you're around here, you can come join us and we'll send you a little email follow-up just to let you know. And if you have more questions, feel free to send them to me. I'm Emily at seedandspark.com, and I will start to gather them and see if I can put together another panel soon. I feel like we need a good 2 hours with Eric and just to download what he's got inside, because I was like, oh wait, I have 17 more questions based on what you said. But it's 3:04. Thank you all for sticking with us. Tell your friends about Mr. Jesus. Set your boundaries about AI. Put that shit in your contracts. Be well.
Know your value.
Go spread good things.
Absolutely.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.